Welcome to the Stay-at-Home Nurse Podcast. I'm your host, Deanna Cooper Gillingham. For over 25 years, I've strived to use my nurse credentials to find work that fit my lifestyle, whether it was raising my 4 children and 3 fur babies, traveling the world, or moving to Mexico and living on the Caribbean Sea. Sometimes I succeeded, and sometimes I failed, but I always learned from the experience. Now, I want to help you by sharing what worked and what didn't work. There are so many opportunities out there for nurses today. The Stay-at-Home Nurse Podcast will inspire and equip you to have a nursing career that is meaningful and supports your lifestyle. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Stay-at-Home Nurse Podcast. I'm really excited that you stuck with me this far. As I was planning out my episodes, I realized that you really need to be familiar with my backstory to understand many of the things that I want to share with you. Now, I have to tell you, I'm a little uncomfortable sharing this because I feel like it's boring because it's my story. But I just got off of an interview for another podcast, the Savvy Scribe podcast with my friend Janine, and she reminded me that it is an interesting story. This is the story of how I went from a bedside nurse to a nurse entrepreneur living on the beach in Mexico. First of all, I want to say this did not happen overnight. I've been a nurse for over 25 years. And as I look back on my career, I can see how step by step, each little move that I made played a part in where I am today. That doesn't mean it will take you 25 years to get to where you want to be. It just means that's how long it took me. Starting off, my plan was never to live on the beach in Mexico. When I went to nursing school back in the 1990s, my goal was to be able to support my family and provide medical insurance. My husband at the time was self-employed, and we had to pay out of pocket for our medical insurance. And I thought, first of all, I love nursing. I wanted to be a nurse, and I thought, well, this would be great because I will work at a hospital and I'll have medical insurance. So that was my first goal. And yes, as you've heard on yesterday's podcast, I did get a job in a hospital. Now, the first job I got in a hospital did not provide medical insurance. I was hired part-time with my first RN nursing job, which that was fine because my husband at the time did work and he provided the income. So my income was an extra bonus, I guess you could say. After working at that hospital for 11 months, I decided to move on to a full-time position. Now, even though I worked over 40 hours a week, I did that because I was part-time and would pull extra shifts. I worked a lot of 3 to 11, and when somebody called off for night shift, I would stay, which meant I worked a 16-hour shift. So if you looked at my paycheck, I was working 40 hours a week, but I was not technically a full-time employee. And when I went to management, they didn't have a full-time employee position, so I had to look elsewhere. I did find a full-time employee position at another hospital, and that was on an oncology unit. Now, what's interesting about that, when I look back at my career, was that when I was in nursing school, I always thought oncology would be a neat place to work. And the way that I got my foot in the door there was because right out of college, after I finished my associate degree, I loved learning. So I took a critical care and EKG interpretation course. And I did that while I was working as an LPN for the home hospice that I was working for. And the manager on the oncology unit, even though I didn't need EKG experience or ICU experience, liked the fact that I had done this on my own. So she thought I would be a good fit for her unit. And I was. I was there for probably about 5 years. I was there long enough to get oncology certified, and I really liked it. While I was there, I went from days and 3 to 11s to 3 to 11 at night shift, and then I started a program on our unit where we did 12-hour shifts. We had to find a partner. This was something new that the unit did. So I really liked it, and I used that job to my advantage, as well as provided excellent care for our patients. After a little over 5 years, as I've mentioned before, I get bored, and so I wanted to try something new. And I went to home health and hospice. I started working for a company that was a home health company, and they were opening up a hospice department, I guess would be the best word. There were 3 of us that were hired, each of us in a different office that would be the hospice nurses. So to start off, we did both home health and hospice as we picked up hospice clients. I did that for about a year, and that was really interesting. That was the first experience I had outside of the hospital, making my own schedule and going and visiting patients, and we really helped to develop that program. So that was a really good feeling. Now, after a while, I wanted to do something a little bit different. We did not have an on-call person. There were 3 of us. We took turns for on-call, and it just didn't fit with what I wanted to do. I had always wanted to be a labor and delivery nurse. So I shared a little bit with you last week about how I became a labor and delivery nurse, but I want to share a little bit more about that. So the area I was working in did not have a lot of flexibility in what department you worked in. Basically, nursing jobs were hard to come by at that time. It's not that way now, but I had a friend who had moved out of state 9 hours away, and she had a really great job. And I would go and visit her a lot. We would travel to Florida, go to Disney World, go on a cruise or something like that. And her place in South Carolina was the halfway point. So I would stop by and visit her, and I would always say, "Oh, you're so lucky you get to live here." And she would always remind me, "You could live here too." So at one point, I kind of sort of took her up on her offer. She let me know that one of the hospitals that she had worked for in that town was coming to our city and recruiting nurses and asking them to come and work in South Carolina because they had a shortage there. And this was the way I would be able to get my foot in the door to working labor and delivery. Well, when I went on the interview, the hiring manager told me that she had just hired 2 graduate nurses, and she would have loved to have hired me for the labor and delivery because she would have preferred somebody with experience, but she had no openings at that time. She did tell me if I agreed to go to work for them she gave me a choice of several units. I chose the surgical intensive care unit, that within a year, when they had the next opening, she would let me transfer to her labor and delivery unit. So that's how I got to South Carolina. Now, I have to tell you, when I started working in the SICU, I loved it. I loved working in ICU. And when the year was up and a position came open in L&D, I really questioned if this is what I wanted to do. But that had been my dream since I went to nursing school to become a labor and delivery nurse. So I went ahead and asked for the transfer, and it was granted. This was an excellent decision. I learned a lot on this labor and delivery unit. And I met nurses that really took me under their wing and taught me how to be an excellent labor and delivery nurse. One of those nurses actually went a little above and beyond. She was the one who encouraged me to go beyond where we were working, and she let me know that labor and delivery wasn't done the same way everywhere, and I needed to experience different hospitals and the way things were done at different places. So she encouraged me to get a job as a per diem, like labor and delivery nurse, I guess is what you call it. So I worked for an agency, and when they would have a need at a hospital, I would go and work there and fill in that need. Now, I will have to tell you, I'm a chicken, and I wasn't real secure with myself at the time. It's not that way now, but back then, that's how I was, and I was really afraid to do this. Some of these hospitals were small rural hospitals. You would be the only labor and delivery nurse there, and I was a little afraid of it. So my friend/mentor actually went with me on my first job, and she and I worked together on the first agency job, and it made me feel so much better. I don't know if I would have ever done this without her, but it became addictive. I loved the money that I could make by doing this extra shift. I would work 12 hours and I would make more than I would on call at the hospital I worked at. Plus, I was getting some really good experience, and I was learning that things were done differently in different places. It was really good for me. I worked at several different hospitals. One of the hospitals that I worked at was about halfway between my town and the capital of the state, which I would be moving to shortly. So I met some nurses at this agency job that I had, and when I moved to that new town, I was able to ask them questions about, there were 3 big hospital labor and delivery units there, what each one was like, which one I would be a good fit for. We talked about what I liked, what I didn't like, how I liked to work, what I was comfortable with, and we decided on a job that we thought I would enjoy at a certain hospital. Now, they gave me some contact information I talked about that in my networking podcast last week. And I was able to reach out to the hiring manager. They did not have any open positions at the time. So what I did was I actually did a travel nurse assignment because this place, this new town that I was moving to was more than 50 miles from my current town. I was able to do a travel assignment, meaning they would put me up in this new town. As far as housing, they paid for the housing, not just for me, but for me, my husband at the time, and my 4 children. And so we got a 3-bedroom apartment that they paid for. And we went to this new town, and I was able to work at one of the other hospitals. This was great because I got to work at this other hospital, which was a much bigger hospital, and decide if this is where I wanted to work, because they did offer me another either travel assignment or a full-time position when I was finished. But in the meantime, the hospital that I had wanted to work in had an opening. So after my 3-month assignment at the one hospital, I was able to go and get a full-time position at the other hospital that I had actually wanted to go into. And this made me feel very confident too that I was making the right decision and the right choice between the hospitals that I was going to work at. Loved this hospital. I have to say that I couldn't say enough good things about the doctors, the co-workers that I had. This was as close to perfect as any job had ever gotten. And a lot of it was because of the respect between the doctors and the nurses. It was an absolutely wonderful environment to work in. After a few years, though, I had a problem with an injury that I had sustained to my ankle, and it was getting really hard for me to work 12-hour shifts on the floor. It just physically wasn't possible for me anymore. So I ended up going to a clinic, to work at a clinic in the GI lab. And that was a very interesting move for me. Another reason for the move was I wanted to work daylight. I had been working night shift for almost my entire nursing career. And at this point where we were in the lives of my family, I just wanted to work day shift. It was time. So I started working in a GI lab. This was in a inpatient setting. So we did outpatient GI lab. We also did the inpatients. We'd go to the floor, take our equipment. I also got to work in the interventional radiology lab when we would do ERCPs. I loved it. I always just loved learning new things. So this was really good for me. I really enjoyed this job also. It was something different, something I had never expected to do, but I loved it. My next job after that, again, my ankle injury was acting up. My foot was swelling a lot. I thought that working in this GI lab where I would actually sometimes during procedures, because I would be in the room during the procedure, the ERCP or the colonoscopy, and I would sometimes have to put my foot up and while the procedure was going on, and it just didn't help. I was having a really hard time because of this injury. So that's when I got the opportunity to work as the on-call hospice nurse. This was great because it wasn't going to be on my feet for 8 to 12 hours a day. So I did that job for about a year, and it was a great move, and I learned a lot. But the reason I decided to leave that job was because I was, if you heard my podcast yesterday, I talked about you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And the people that I was spending the most time with were the 2 people who picked up the bodies for the funeral homes. And as nice as they were, and as much as I got along with them, I needed to get a life. So at that point, that is when my friend had reached out to me and she had been for about a year encouraging me to go work at an insurance company as a case manager. I have to tell you, I wasn't real excited about this job. I didn't know what a case manager was. I didn't know what they did. I wasn't excited about working for an insurance company. I wasn't excited about working in an office job. I loved taking care of patients. I loved doing procedures. I loved being in the OR when we did C-sections. I loved holding my patients' hands when they were dying. I just loved that one-on-one patient contact. And I felt like I would be missing that when I went to case management. But as you heard in yesterday's podcast, I did go to case management. And I have to tell you, I loved it. I was so surprised at how much I loved it. I realized that I was still doing for my patients. I was just doing for them in a completely different way. The first patient that I had that I was able to take from their initial stroke all the way through to discharging them and see them through all of the changes that they had to make and helping them to get into their new normal and making sure they got the utmost best rehab that they could get, maximize their benefit, and really helped guide them through that, both them and their spouse. I was speaking with their spouse at the beginning before they were able to talk to me because of their stroke. This just really made me feel really good about what I was doing. I found a new way to do nursing. So I fell in love with case management. The type of case management I did for the insurance company, we did all of the utilization review on our patients. So I was doing utilization review, learning that along with case management, and I just loved it. I wanted to work from home. That was one of my goals when I first went into case management, and I could work from home from this company, but I still got called in. It wasn't real stable, so I ended up going to another company where I did transplant case management, and this was a 100% remote job, and I have to say I loved it. This was probably the best job I ever had, and I say that because everything from the management to the people that I dealt with, everything just worked so well. I was given so much independence to really be the nurse that I was. I was told, I made good decisions, go out and do what you need to do. The only thing they cared about was the result, not how I got there. I was not micromanaged like I hear a lot of people complaining about. When there was a contract, I was able to go out there and negotiate contracts. I was given a lot of freedom to do what I did best, and I absolutely loved that, and I thrived at that. I think that's one of the things that gave me the idea that I could go out on my own and be successful with my own business, because I was seeing the success that I was making in my department with the contracts that I had. So from there, when I was a case manager with my first job, I had to, within I think it was 4 years, become certified. I chose to be certified under the Commission for Case Management Certification. And when I was looking for resources to study for this exam, I couldn't find anything that met my standards. Basically, the CCMC, the Commission for Case Management Certification, gave us an exam blueprint, and they told us all the subjects that we would be tested on. And when I was reading books, I couldn't find all of these subjects in any books. And because I was fairly new to case management, I didn't understand the terminology. Maybe I knew how to do something, but I didn't know that's what we called it. So I was kind of behind the 8 ball, I felt. So basically, I delayed taking my test, and I started really researching it. And when I say really researching, I mean I went out there, I went to LinkedIn and formed my own study group. I went on LinkedIn and asked, is anybody else taking this exam? Would you want to form an online study group? And we did this using Google Hangouts at the time. And we would get together once a week and talk about different areas of the exam. I would do research using Google, doing Google searches. I was asking people, calling people that I knew worked for different areas and saying, what does this mean? How am I supposed to interpret this? What are they looking for? So it took me a year, and I compiled my own notes. As I was answering each of these areas, I was writing my own notes, and then I was also putting them up on my website. And I did this to help other people that were studying for the exam all over the country. They could access my notes and see what I was finding. I decided that to reach more people, I needed to write a book, the book that I was looking for that wasn't out there. So that's what I did. I took all of the notes that I had on my website, I compiled them into a book, and as I was starting to figure out how to get this book published, I discovered that the average book takes a year to 18 months to get published. Now, the problem was that the CCMC was going to be updating their exam in about a year. So chances were that by the time I got this book published, it would already be out of date. The information wouldn't be relevant. So because of that, I decided to self-publish. And that was something else I had to learn. I had to go out there, and just like I had learned about case management, I had to learn about publishing and self-publishing. So I did that, and I published my book. And I have to tell you, the fear I had when I hit the publish button is about as strong as the fear I had publishing my first podcast episode. When I published the book, when I actually hit the button, it was about 2 or 3 in the morning. I was so tired that I didn't even know what I was doing. And I think if I would have been more awake, I would have never done it. And it's kind of the same thing with publishing this podcast. I'm a little afraid of putting all this information out there, but I feel like this is information that can help so many people. So I'm going to get over my fear, and I'm going to do it. And actually, I had my business partner publish the first couple episodes, because if it was up to me, they would never be good enough, and I would never publish them. So I'm hoping that you are learning from this experience and seeing things that happened that were good for me and were bad for me. Some of the things that were bad for me were I waited sometimes too long to change jobs. Sometimes I knew I was in a dead-end job where I would never make more more money or advance, and I stayed there because maybe I liked the people or I was comfortable. But the best thing that I did was change jobs frequently and get all this different experience. I would have never got the job offer for a case manager if I had worked in one place my entire career, because I had oncology experience and hospice experience and ICU experience and labor and delivery experience and, oh my gosh, med surg experience and home health experience. That's why they thought I would be good at case management and easy to train in that. So I look back at some of the things that some people might see as failures, and I turned those into successes for me. So how did I get on the beach in Mexico? When I was working the best job that I ever had, and I had published my book, and it was doing well on Amazon. I was getting great reviews. It was selling much more than I ever thought it would sell. And then, as I had hinted to earlier, the testing organization updated the test. And I was going to have to rewrite the book so that it would be updated. And I started to do that while I was working my full-time job, and it had taken me a year to write the first book. And I thought, oh, I can knock this one out in 3 months. It's just an update. Well, when I started working on it, I realized that was not going to work. I had a decision to make. I would either have to quit my job and write the second edition full-time, or I would have to give up and just not write the second edition. And I had a lot of people emailing me saying, when are you coming out with a second edition? Are you coming out with a second edition? I felt like I would let so many people down if I didn't come up with this book, because it had helped so many people to pass the exam. So this was a really hard decision for me. I was working from home. I loved my job, but a lot of things in my life had changed at that point. And some of the things that had changed was I had one of my children had graduated and moved away. Another one was graduating college and moving away. Another one was graduating high school and moving away. So I was becoming an empty nester very quickly. And I realized that this was the time, if ever, for me to become an entrepreneur. It's something that I think in the back of my head I've always wanted to do. I just didn't know how you did it. And now this was my opportunity. I made the decision to quit my full-time job. I sold my home. I sold everything in my home that would not fit in the back of my Hyundai Elantra, either sold or gave it away, and moved to Mexico. I spent the first 3 months after I sold my home recovering from surgery on that foot ankle thing that I had going on, and living in an RV with my now business partner in my mother's driveway. And so that's where the second edition of the book was written. Once it was finished and published, we sold the RV and drove to Mexico. Honestly, our first impression was that we were just going to kind of be digital nomads and move to different areas, but we fell in love with the town of Puerto-Venturas. We met a lot of friends here, and so we haven't moved. We've been here since. We have a little condo on the beach, and I get to write and do my work from my balcony overlooking the Caribbean Sea, which I absolutely love. I'm a water person. I love looking at the water. It calms me down. Now, this is the very skinny version. And I say that because this is the kind of the sweet version. There were a lot of rocky roads along the way. I don't want you to think that this was all just a bed of roses, because it wasn't. And at other times, I'll be able to get into some of the things that happened that maybe weren't so good. I'm just the type of person that I tend to look at the positives and not the negatives and focus on the positives. So if you hear me talking about a lot of things in the positive sense and maybe not bringing up a lot of the negative, it's because that's just what I choose to focus on. But when necessary, I will let you know about the pitfalls that I've gone through and how I've gotten myself out of some of those. So, thank you for listening. I hope you have found this somewhat interesting. This is just me kind of putting it out there. This is my story. This is what I'll be able to refer people back to when I'm explaining different things that I've learned along the way. And I think that this was just needed to get the information out there so that everybody kind of sees where I'm coming from. I have learned so much over the last over 25 years. And I've made a lot of really good decisions, and I've made a lot of really stupid decisions. And some things have gone really well for me, and some things have gone not so well for me. But lately, I've been able to look back and really see what worked, what didn't work, how things when things did work, why they worked, and I want to share that with you. I want you to not have to make the same mistakes that I made. I want to give you the blueprint and the map to get to where you want to be as quickly as you can so that you're not waiting 25 years as I am. Now, that being said, my goal now within probably the last maybe 7 years has been to live on the beach in Mexico, but that was not always my dream. That was my dream after I became an empty nester. And it has worked out really well for me. I purposefully made my business location independent so that I could work from anywhere, and that's worked out really well for me. I hope you found this somewhat interesting, somewhat useful, somewhat motivating, that you too can have your dream life and you can use your nursing credentials to get you there. I look forward to sharing more information with you in future episodes, so be sure, if you haven't done so already, hit the subscribe button. And that's a wrap for this episode. We will see you again next week.